Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ben Kashor, and I am the Li Ka-shing Professor in Public Management at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. I've been tapped by our Dean, Danny Kwa, to help initiate efforts to build upon the success of our Institute of Water Policy to expand to include the environment and sustainability generally. And in that capacity, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the third of a five-part webinar series designed to develop this institute in ways that will be fit for purpose to address the goals and policy needs of government and various stakeholders. And today, our questions are concerning the policy capacity needs of non-governmental organizations and nonprofits, and how can an institute like ours be designed to improve their policy analysis needs. The moderator, I'm pleased to say, for this panel will be Professor Jolene Lin, who is on the Faculty of Law here at NUS and is also the director of the Asia Pacific Center for Environmental Law. Her CV is extensive and lengthy. Let me just say that she specializes in research on climate change law and transnational environmental law. And you can tell from her CV has made a conscious effort to take her knowledge and help make it of use to society and stakeholders, including governments and NGOs. So I'm now going to turn over the floor to her to introduce our panel to get our reflexive conversation going. Welcome, Dr. Jolene Lin.
Thank you, Professor Kashor. Thank you for the opportunity to moderate this really interesting panel discussion, which I'm really looking forward to hearing from the panelists. I'm going to first begin by introducing our esteemed panelists. Today, we have 4 panelists joining us for the conversation. Our first panelist would be Mr. Benjamin Tay, who is Executive Director of PM HAZE, which is the People's Movement to Stop Haze. Mr. Tay coordinates the haze prevention programs, both locally and overseas. And he aspires for people to go beyond adaptation strategies and to really find solutions to prevent transboundary haze. Our second panelist is Ms. Ariel Muller, who is Managing Director for Forum for the Future, Asia Pacific. Ms. Ariel Muller first foray into the overlap of design, business, and sustainability began formally at Bainbridge, a graduate institute. And since then, she has worked with many major transnational corporates to design and develop sustainability programs. Our third panelist is Mr. Chandra Panjiwi-Bowo. Mr. Chandra Panjiwi-Bowo is the Asia Pacific Director of Rainforest Alliance. Mr. Chandra has more than 17 years of experience in environment, agricultural supply chain issues, forestry, natural resource management, food security, and climate change. And as the country director for Rainforest Alliance, he's dedicated to sustainable agriculture and economic empowerment. And our fourth panelist today would be Mr. Narata Samaki, also known as Pak Koni. Pak Koni is a country director for World Resources Institute, Indonesia. He was formerly the Deputy Minister of Indonesia's Unit for Development Monitoring and Oversight. And he has joined WRI Indonesia at a time when their important work in tackling deforestation and other critical issues is expanding. And I'm very glad to welcome all of you today. And without further ado, I'm going to start the conversation rolling by first inviting Mr. Benjamin Tay. So how the conversation will go is that we'll be tackling 2 main questions. But there are 2 questions that we are hoping to get your feedback on in trying to design a policy institute for environment and sustainability that is fit for purpose, as Professor Kashor has mentioned. So what we'll do is we'll go through the first question where every panelist has about 5 minutes to respond to it. And then we'll go on to look at the second question before we open the floor to discussion with the audience. So Mr. Tay, thank you very much for joining us today. The first question that I would like you to speak to would be, what do you think are the most pressing issues that an environmental and sustainability policy institute ought to be addressing today?
Thank you, Dr. Jolene, for inviting me to speak first. And yeah, I would just like to give a quick shout out to all my fellow panelists. Really humbled to be among all of you here. I've been following some of your work as well over the past couple of years, and thank you all for doing what you do. Yeah, I think being the first speaker is always tough to start the conversation, but and I think it's not an easy question to answer as well. I'm sure many of you will agree with me. What should a institute be focusing on? I mean, there's so many issues that we face in terms of when we look at climate change, when we look at the environment, right? From our perspective, from a small organization's perspective, we would like to see programs or perhaps even topics or discussions that would help us to build capacity, help us to build capabilities, especially in the area of our individual work, right? And of course, I must admit that, it's not easy because environmental organizations can be involved in very, very different kind of work, from encouraging consumer actions like, for example, recycling your home waste, for example, right? All the way to conservation of a forest in a particular area in this world, right? So these are two things that require very, very different actions, require very, very different kind of not only actions in terms of how a regular person can participate in, but also actions in terms of what governments can actually do, So I think that as an institute, perhaps there needs to be kind of a broad overview of a plethora of issues that cover all these different areas of the climate, and as well as to support small organizations, because I believe that from my experience, especially in Singapore, environmental groups are quite fragmented in that sense. There are a lot of different, there are hundreds and hundreds of environmental interest groups, from groups that are just kind of informally set up to groups that are like us, who are maybe a registered charity that has been a young registered charity that has been around for a couple of years, right? And our needs and requirements are actually quite different in terms of what we require to, for example, effect policy change, right? So perhaps maybe I'll talk a little bit about advocacy, right? So that's what we do, right? We try to advocate for a particular type of lifestyle that a consumer should participate in, right? Whether it is to support sustainable palm oil when they go out and eat in restaurants, or when they go out to the supermarket as a way to stop or prevent transboundary haze, or perhaps it would be to participate in a trip that we run to Malaysia to understand how peatland ecosystems are managed, or how peatland forests are being conserved, right? So these kinds of interactions are actually what these kinds of things are what we do, and then we hope that can translate into, from a consumer point of view, what a consumer can do can kind of trickle up to telling either companies within the supply chain that we want certain things to happen. For example, we want you to start using a more responsible form of cooking oil, or we want governments to start helping to protect our peatland forests. Not only definitely not in Singapore. I mean, we don't really have peatland forests in Singapore, but in Indonesia and Malaysia, right? So how can we actually have that kind of impact? How can that everyday consumer action translate into some kind of policy implication or policy development in this particular area? Yeah. So I think that's, from my perspective, I think that's kind of important. I know it's easy to speak about these things, but it's difficult to implement, or it's difficult to actually put something into motion. And I really appreciate the opportunity to actually be here and to talk about this, right? And to figure out perhaps, you know, after today, right, we can actually sit down and figure out how we can actually move forward on actually implementing a strategy like that. Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Ting. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think this is the beginning of a conversation, a very long conversation, and hopefully an ongoing one, because it's supposed to be. I think such a policy institute, you know, would love to be able to support the kind of advocacy work that your organization does. I'm just going to pick up on two things that you've mentioned. One is that you seem to see that one of the key roles of a institute will be to serve as some kind of orchestrator to try to sort of facilitate some kind of discussions and dialogue and even cooperation amongst all the environmental groups that you've mentioned, you know, tend to they exist in Singapore, right? So I think that's a very important thing that we'll come back to. You've mentioned that there are so many environmental issues that we struggle with today, which is really quite a tragedy if we think about it. The Institute has identified 4 main pillars within the environmental sphere as their focal points: climate and energy, circular economy, biodiversity conservation, water and oceans. Do you feel that these broad categories adequately capture the main environmental challenges that you think we should be addressing? Or do you think there are themes that you might recommend?
No, I think these are actually very good broad themes that that the institute has that you guys have actually come up with, right? So climate and energy definitely, I mean, covers a whole range of issues, right? I mean, just the word climate, right, really is already a huge overview of it really speaks to a huge overview of issues, right? You know, and energy, you know, it covers all kinds of energy use. Circular economy, definitely. I mean, definitely for us, you know, responsible consumption and production is something that's very important, right? And I think that's definitely covered under the circular economy. And biodiversity conservation as well, like I mentioned, you know, the conservation and the protection of peat forests, I think definitely is covered under there. And water and oceans definitely is a very big issue, you know, in terms of, you know, efforts right now. I mean, a lot of it, you know, trends like recycling and you know, things like that, right, are actually moving towards that area. So I think definitely it covers a lot of the issues that we face at the moment. And there's a lot of room. I mean, I must say it's broad enough so that there's room for expansion within these categories as well.
Sure.
So
sure.
you know, I wouldn't want to go into categories that are too specific, right? Because that would limit our kind of conversations around these areas of work as well.
Thank you, Mr. Ting. My next panelist would be Ms. Muller. Ms. Muller, perhaps you'd like to start by introducing to us what Forum for the Future does.
Sure. Thank you. We Forum for the Future thinks a lot about the future in terms of what is going to be the sort of dynamic windows of opportunity to accelerate this transition to what we started to call a regenerative and just future. So in what ways are we being more than sustainable, but actually giving back, and then also making sure that this transition that we're about to go through is actually inclusive and is actually changing some of the power dynamics in terms of people that kind of got us into this mess that we're inheriting with this legacy economic system. So what does that mean actually in practice? We design and deliver change initiatives. And right now we're doing work around the protein challenge in Southeast Asia. And asking those questions as there's this rapid investment into alternative proteins, is it actually delivering the positive type of outcomes that we want for people, for biodiversity, all those other types of factors? And I'll speak to that. I'll frame that up a little bit more, because when I responded to this question, I thought sort of what are the two trends that I think are really shaping our work and that I think would have implications on what it means to enable this transition in the next 10 years that we are sort of charged as people in these leadership positions right now, who are making decisions or educating people. What are the things we need to think about within this amount of time? And then we've also got work in looking at the same issue in renewable energy. So what is the common denominator of our work right now is this trend of a rapid growth towards voluntary market solutions, and in a sense that the market is going to actually provide these types of solutions, and a number of commitments in terms of carbon credits and net zero. And Pakoni, we've been in conversations together about looking at this rapid investment into nature-based solutions. And thinking markets are going to solve this. And actually, I think there's a number of unintended consequences that can come when a challenge is purely defined by a market-based solution. And then the second kind of key trend that I think is shaping our work is, and I've heard it described as, we're moving from a kind of complex system to actually one that's going into adaptive crisis. And that in the next 10 years, we'll actually be absorbing these different types of shocks in terms of climate change impacts. So those two factors of this rapid investment into sustainable solutions, is it actually delivering the outcomes we want? And then this, then what I anticipate that we aren't even entirely prepared for. And I do spend a lot of time reading about, the negative things that are going to happen. So I might have a tainted view, but I think, being prepared for what is really going to be disruption from climate. So what is the role of NGOs at those intersections? And I think for voluntary capital, these kind of voluntary market solutions, that they are actually delivering the outcomes that they need to. That knowledge is usually held by on-the-ground NGOs that are working closest to those communities. And I think they need to be strengthened during this transition in the next 10 years, because I think they actually hold the knowledge, including the organizations that are on the panel today. And then in terms of, and this speaks a little bit to a question you had, that in terms of this other concept around we're going into an adaptive crisis, I think that as much as we can increase the networking, the network effect across these frontline NGOs that are closest to the challenge, how much can we connect with them? And the YABB Foundation, which is the foundation arm of GOJAC, just launched a Changemakers Catalyst Lab, which was really about innovators bringing their ideas around the water challenge and climate crisis, and related to climate crisis. But the real power of what they're doing is creating this responsive, adaptive network of frontline NGOs that can respond to the crisis. And when these things come, I actually think it's going to be that connected network that brings resiliency to communities. And so then what then would I say to policymakers is, how do we help funds get to those NGOs and strengthen those NGOs in the system? And one of the things, because I asked a few colleagues about these questions, and one of the things that sort of repeatedly came up, which is probably not surprising, is how do you make the ability to give donations to NGOs less encumbered? And it's you can get tax benefits in the US, and there's a number of NGOs that can receive funds. And what might that look like in this region in terms of facilitating funds to those on the ground NGOs? And the program that Pakoni and I had time kind of overlapping, we talked a lot about first mile organizations and first mile communities. And I think it's about strengthening those organizations over the next few years.
Thank you very much. No, that's very important. The idea that NGOs are at the front line of helping society adapt to the shocks that will be delivered because of climate change. And the idea that the role of the Institute would be to help strengthen as well these NGOs. Thank you very much, Ms. Miller, and I'll come back to you with our second question later. I'd like to invite our next speaker, Mr. Chandra, who is Asia Pacific Director of Rainforest Alliance. Perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about what Rainforest Alliance does, and then we will dive into the question. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jolene, and yeah, thanks also Chandra Ponjibo, Rainforest Alliance, and basically we are an international NGO, so working to transform the world to be more sustainable by using market and social force to protect nature and also to improve the welfare of our farmers and also forest communities. And by doing that, we are collaborating with companies, food production companies. And this is also related to your first questions. If you're talking about what will be the biggest crisis that we are facing right now, I think Ariel and Benjamin already put the right context that I believe we all agree that the biggest crisis right now that we face is about climate crisis. But let's not forget there is another crisis in parallel to that, which also related to the climate crisis. The loss of our biodiversity and the degradation of our remaining tropical rainforest, and that's in no doubt contributing significantly to the changing of our climates, and at the same time creating more and more natural related disasters. And the people that receiving the impacts are exactly the people that has least capability, least capacities to adapt. Our farmers who are living in the rural areas, our first communities who are pretty much depending their livelihoods from natural resources. They are the one that become the first victims. And Rainforest Alliance trying to work focusing very much on that areas where people in nature intersects within that particular topics. We know that one of the major driver for deforestation is coming from the expansion of our agriculture products. So we work closely with food-based and food production companies, food industries, because besides as a driver, they also can become, and they should become the key solutions to change, to transform the practice. And we are very much focusing on market transformations. We encourage, we force, and also we collaborate with industry to really change the behaviors, to really change the way they are working, and especially for the food-based companies that very much relies their productions towards agriculture commodities. It always intersects with a natural resource and also with forest. And that is also why we are creating this Rainforest Alliance Sustainable Agriculture Standards. Now it's just been renewed by the 2020 versions, where we're working with cocoa, coffee, tea, and other agriculture commodities to really provide them guidance and also to work together how to transform coming from the three pillars of sustainability, so social economies and environments, and starting from the producer level, how we can transform the practice into more sustainable, and also how we can create awareness within our consumers to create more demands on sustainable products, and also how we can create market rules. And whenever we're talking about market rules, then it can be in the form of law, mandatory law, that can really push and trigger the behavior change of our industries, and also can be in the form of voluntary practice. Standards become one of them. And through standards sustainability, we incentivize, we provide them benefits to track them and to encourage them to transform their practice into more sustainable. At the end, the aim is really back to protecting the natures and really ensuring that we can improve the welfare and the capacity, adaptive capacity of our rural communities, farmers, because they are the ones who are suffering very much. Thanks, Julian.
Thank you so much. So I think it's emerged from the discussion so far for three speakers that the issues are all intersecting, and there's, clearly climate change, deforestation, biodiversity loss. All these are critical issues that we face in this region and as well as globally. So I guess one of the things that the Institute would like to know more is that based on your organization's experience and approach, do you think that, would it be fair to conclude that climate change, deforestation, sustainable agriculture, these are the key issues that you think that a Public Policy Institute ought to address?
Yes, that's how I conclude that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chandra. All right, I'll go on to the next speaker. I'd like to invite Pak Kony to respond to this question. Pak Kony, would you like to please share with us your thoughts about what you think are the most pressing issues that an Environmental and Sustainable Policy Institute ought to address? The floor is yours.
Thank you. So let me address this in a bit of a practical way by referring to works that we are doing at WRI Indonesia, because I cannot claim that I could be able to prescribe something for your institution development. So I'd say that the climate crisis signified by the latest IPCC report, and also the biodiversity threat signified by the Skupta report, are the biggest agendas for Environmental and Sustainability Policy Institute, including WRI Indonesia. But specific issues from those two agendas are then being adopted by various institutions in accordance to their interests or visions or national sustainable development challenges. For example, a particular institute will adopt, let's say, climate finance aspects, as Ariel just alluded previously, or other deal with energy transition issues and so on and so forth. As for WRI Indonesia, the pressing issues are energy transition, and then also mentioned again by Ariel, nature-based solution, which in this case involving reduced deforestation, increased peat and forest restoration. Benjamin kindly also touched on that. Also sustainable commodity supply chains. Air quality improvement also pressing issues for us, WRI. And then indigenous people, land rights and livelihood. Because then people, planet, prosperity, those are things that connects the issues, actually current issues. And again, we also deal with the development of cities, rapid development of cities. Hence, resilience coastal cities is also pressing issues for us. Indonesia is the largest archipelagic countries, and therefore this is our pressing issues as well. Ocean plastic waste, and the last, which perhaps being touched by Chandra, is food and land use system improvement. So, but in my view, it is how to deliver impacts as an institution that matters most, which to me makes it a practical pressing issues to address. Among WRI Indonesia principle or ways of working is to change the norm so that it will be used as a compass or reference point in providing any policies and regulations. Such policies and regulations which will remain to be off surface, if that is the correct terms, even when the executive or legislative parts of the government change. So changing the norm is our quest here at WRI Indonesia. Let me give you an example. Before 2014, around the time where Indonesia got hit by heavy fires, and I think this is prompted PM Hayes to establish themselves. There is no information out there in public on who's owning the land that is got caught in fire. We don't know how to blame, who to blame, and so on and so forth. So WRI at the time, of course, I was at the president's office at the time. I wasn't with WRI at the time, but I have a close connection with WRI at the time. So we issued publicly for the first time who owns the lands, the holding companies, and the lot of them, and then put it on public space. Yeah. That is the first time in Indonesia history, and that actually changed the norm, which is now it is quite common for people to ask that kind of information. Normal for people to to ask for access to that information to the government. So we are able to change the norm. With that, there's a lot of progression or change or whatnot happen because of changing the norms. Whomever going to lead the country or a province or whatnot will not be able to change any regulation in regard to data transparency and data sharing. So we strive to do that. That is why I told you earlier on. It is the most important thing, the pressing issue to be how to create that impact. Not so much on categorizing or classifying this one issues is important and so on and so forth. How to deliver that to me is most important. Over to you, Dr. Jolene. Thanks.
Thank you, Bakoni. I couldn't agree more. The idea of the fact that what we need is changing norms, transforming lifestyle habits and our choices as consumers, as citizens. I think that's very, very critical. And the idea of delivering impact on the ground. That takes me actually to the next question. And I'm going to invite Mr. Benjamin Tay to be the first again. I shouldn't keep picking on you. I feel a bit bad, but it's an honor. The question I have is what type of engagement efforts do you think are the most effective in addressing on-the-ground issues? So I guess when speaking from the perspective of PM Hayes, what do you think are the most effective engagement efforts for advocacy? And love to hear your views on this.
Thanks, Dr. Jolene. Yeah, and I'm happy to be picked on. I think it's an honor. Engagement, I think, for our work, having some kind of foundational research on a particular topic is actually very important. So, perhaps I'll give an example of something that we do. We run a small peatland restoration program in Sungai Tohor in Indonesia, in Riau. It's not a very big project. We have a couple of hectares of land there that we're doing some restoration work together with the community. But the main thing there is the main thing we're doing there is not to restore the entire landscape on that particular island. The main thing we're doing there is actually collecting data, right? And with this collection of data, we can then translate this into future. I guess it can be used in future areas, like, for example, what kind of plants do we want to put in the nursery before we plant it onto degraded peatlands. What kind of how long should we plant it for? How much water should we use? Things like that. Like, how do we actually implement an effective and a community and an effective peatland restoration program that is able to be led by the community, right? And this requires some form of empirical evidence on our part to be able to say that, if we do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, right? This would result in a particular outcome that we have already experienced, and therefore we think that there is a relative kind of success rate that we can say that we can successfully implement a restoration program, for example, right? So I guess having talked about the example, I guess what we need is really to have that support in terms of developing primary research, right? And this translates into the work that we do with consumers as well, right? Because I can go out there and I can tell governments, or I can tell companies that this is what consumers want, but at the end of the day, they're going to ask me, so where's this data coming from, right? I can't tell them that, from the 500 booths that I've done in the past 5 years, I've talked to X number of people, and these people actually told me that this is what we need, right? So I mean, this is anecdotal kind of evidence that we have, from my experience, from the experience that of running outreach programs. But I think having a more concrete kind of interaction with proper, like, for example, survey methodologies, things like that will actually help us to present our case better to whoever we are speaking to, be it FMCG companies, fast-moving consumer goods companies, or be it governments, ministries who are interested in pushing sustainability in a particular area in the country. Yeah. So I think that's where I feel that there can be some more support.
Thanks, Mr. T. I think that's a very important point. The idea that a research institute could help generate the kind of data-driven research that could support NGOs' advocacy work and engagement with their various stakeholders. Thank you very much. Ms. Muller, I'd like to ask for Forum for the Future, from your experience with that, what types of engagement efforts are most effective in addressing on-the-ground issues?
So I should caveat that we're not an on-the-ground organization. So I can share the kind of principles that I think we generally bring other actors together to identify how they might collaborate, acknowledging that they have the knowledge. And I can share some of what I think has come up through that experience. The one thing that, and I think Pakoni's example almost began to talk about this, is I think we weight these conversations to the environment, and I think they are actually social solutions. And I think we risk truly being transformative if we leave out the kind of power people part of how are we actually changing kind of who has agency and power in those on-the-ground solutions in frontline communities. And I'm thinking about this a lot in the nature-based solutions space, because billions of dollars are being committed, and the communities that are actually closest to those ecosystems that take care of those ecosystems might live on, you know, $2,700 US a year. You know, like there is this huge gap. And so the question, one of the questions that I would, you know, that we would sort of hold if we were going into this work is, how are we looking through the lens of human rights and pay equity and transparency and all that? So that would be one. My second one would be, is a quote I like, that the only sustainable edge is faster learning. Because the world is changing so fast. And I think if you take that as a principle, it's how do you enable collective intelligence and open sourcing and data sharing as much as possible to unlock the capacity for innovation across many different places. So that would be my second one, is that kind of unlock collective intelligence.
Thank you. I really like that phrase. That kind of was what I was writing down, like the idea that we need to unlock and build our collective intelligence, which, you know, current discussions in the global negotiations seem to lack. But anyway, Mr. Chandra, over to you. I'd like to hear, what do you think are the most effective engagement efforts that Rainforest Alliance has used to address these on-the-ground issues that your organization might be addressing?
Yeah, it's always challenging whenever we're talking about what would be then the most effective challenge, because we are always continuously learning by doing so from time to time. But we always believe that the most effective way is really to work directly with real actors that's contributing to the problems, and actors that at the same time is actually part of the solutions. That's why we are focusing on agriculture's, working together with our farmers, working together with our industries, and to see what would be then the best for our nature, what would be then the best for our farmers and rural communities and forest communities, what would be then the best for industry, and trying to see where's the matching point between the three. And we believe we can have that matching point, because that's the only way we can work together and can really have a harmony with the nature. So that's always what we aim to do, where people and nature can thrive in harmonies. And that's also part of our sustainability standards, as I mentioned before. And seeing the scale of the problems, we also realize that doing no harm is just not enough for now. We need to push people, we need to push our industry to transform, to change the behaviors, to change the way they're working currently. It's not just not doing the harms, but also doing positive, regenerates, and also restores the landscapes, restore the health of our soils, because it's already too much degrading in many places, restore the quality of our waters, and also restore the quality of our air, and also restore the quality, restore the value of biodiversity, and also our carbon stock. That is something that we need to do, and that requires a lot effort for multi-stakeholders, and collaboration is the key, basically, among multi-stakeholders. We as NGOs, we also need support from scientific research like you to provide more solid evidence, scientific evidence. What will be then the real issues, and what are the chain of link, what are the theoretical of change, then how we can consider ourselves as conveners, as a catalyst that can really bridge stakeholders, like what Ms. Ariel mentions. As conveners, then we need to be provided with a lot of ammunitions in terms of justifications, in terms of a scientific basis, so we can have a solid solutions and also alternative, and then we can talk, and then we can bridge, we can accommodate all of the multi-stakeholders. And talking about industry and why it's always about food-based industry, and because it's as I mentioned before, it is the major driver for our deforestation currently right now, and at the same time they also the key solutions to really change. We're working with the big companies like Mars, like Nestle, and like Unilever, those companies that can really drive significant change, because we believe that what we do now should be at the scale that matters, at the sector that matters, landscape that matters, speed that matters, because we are running against times for fixing everything. So it's a lot. We don't know what will be then the real most effective, whether our current approach is the most effective, but we always continuously learning from our previous experience. And we are also learning from each other. And that's the beauty of collaborations.
Thank you, Mr. Chandra. I think that's very true, the idea that, and the fact that you're open to learning, that's very important. Pakoni, I'd like to invite you now to speak to this question of what kind of engagement efforts are most effective for addressing the kind of issues on the ground that WRI Indonesia has been tackling.
Thank you, Jolene. As the last speaker, also we have I have this advantage. I can only add to what the previous speakers already offered, which is to me is already informative and quite comprehensive. I would add things that are happening at WRI Indonesia. So we found that it is effective to work with subnational government. Again, this is Indonesia case, and also local stakeholders of the problem, any problem. For example, local, provincial, and sub-provincial government, community groups, indigenous people group, corporates, smallholders, and so on and so forth. And then building up evidence, baselines, theories of change, and so on and so forth, to facilitate and direct our works toward the achievement of the goals, including changes in policy at national and subnational level. As an example, I would mention the initiative that we are currently hosting for Southeast Asia region, which is accountability framework initiative. Rainforest Alliance happened to be part of this initiative. So this is an initiative which working across actors. So it's not just CSO, but also with companies, corporates, the likes of a big, oil producers. I will not name for sure. Working with them, so it's not just working with us as CSO. It's actually important in in conveying what is actually our concerns and what is actually their concern, and then build up a common language where we then able to communicate well. So through this initiative, actually we are able to set up accountability standard to operationalize the NDP, non-deforestation commitment of the corporates within the boundary of their, let's say, limitation. I mean, I'm talking about corporates, and also within the boundaries of things that the CSO would like to see changing as let's say as a watchdog. The meeting between these two, opposite corners, actually providing an alternative from a very formal approach of RSPO, for example, and the very loose approach of, let's say, the ISPO in Indonesia, whereby companies are required to meet some sort of standards, but not so much on asking for sustainability measures to be built in, like the SPO, which lead up to certification. So it's between certification and ticking boxes. The communication able to create a middle ground whereby the companies then feeling that they could achieve the NDPE goals that they put in their system without having the burden of meeting the certification kind of standards. So this kind of communication with all stakeholders actually able to to answer the issues on the ground. So I hope this helps adding ways of working to resolve issues on the ground. Over to you, Jolene. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Pak Kuni. That's a really great example. So I'm going to now turn the conversation over to the audience. We're going to start the Q&A session. We have a question here. It's pretty much a very direct question. How can the Institute best work with your organizations? And to rephrase it, I mean, it's also been rephrased by to say, what do you think could be the Institute's comparative advantage, and how could it complement your organization's work? I think we've mentioned a couple of things here. The idea that the center could be doing work in primary research, so generating findings and studies that will really be useful in helping to support your advocacy and engagement with stakeholders. We've also heard a bit about how the Institute could complement NGOs' work by strengthening NGOs and building capacity. But perhaps just this would be an opportunity to kind of maybe build on that. And I'm going to go the other way around, Pak Kuni, so that it would be fair to you as well. So I'd like to hear from you first, Pak Kuni.
Thank you. So Singapore entities like NUS is actually having a very unique position in Southeast Asia, stemming from the fact that you are the hub for finance and whatnot, which actually enable you to have access to various networks as well as data and information. So as CSO, we need to have that kind of access. Something that for us CSO sometimes becoming a challenge, quite a challenge. Yeah. So when we collaborate with the institute or institution like you, we will able to get that kind of data information and then able to do a better analytical works for sure. So that is the first obvious advantage of having to collaborate with you. Yeah? And then the next one is influence. If we want to change the norm, actually what we are doing is not is influencing people actually, right? And having a partners like you, for example, would enable us to reach a wider audience. With your landing stature, if that is the right ways of saying it, the information and the communication piece that we put across to the public would be more credible. So those are two things that I see going to benefit us to work with you as an institution. Thank you, Jolene.
Thank you, Pak Kuni. So the idea of access to a hub of finance, knowledge, data, as well as influence. Mr. Chandra, what would you say about what would help complement your organization's work?
Well, it can be many. I have a lot of things in my mind, but if you're starting with water work and try to connect with what we do in Rainforest Alliance for the sustainable agricultures, because whenever we're talking about sustainable agricultures, it means all of the three pillars, including economy, social, and environments. And whenever we're talking about environments, we always connect farming practice with water qualities. So there is a crisis in water qualities because of improper use of pesticides within farming in large scales. And that's why we always have this integrated pest management, trying to avoid this type of dangerous pesticide that's really have bad effects to water qualities, not just water, also soil qualities, but also human health. So you could be the conveners trying to bridge between those pesticide producer companies and to see how's their perspective in seeing these water quality issues, and then how we can make a connection, how we can ensure that all of because it's always combinations. Industry can become a problem creator, but also can become the agent of change to provide solutions. And as a Institute of Water Policies, then you can become the conveners and the bridgers between those between those type of stakeholders. How we can really save our water qualities by not using the pesticides that are harmful for the environments. What are the alternatives? And that is something that we also trying to find a solution, because of course we can always find the nature-based solutions. Then it's always contradict with the needs with the interest from that industry, and still become open discussion on that particular topic. So that one about water policies. And considering that you're located in Singapore, there's a lot, and I believe Singapore has done much of their roles. In fact, that you're located in adjacent to the areas that has the largest tropical rainforest in Asia, the third largest in the world, and maybe shrinking very much rapidly currently. So you can also be conveners for the industries. You know that Singapore has become the biggest and most strategic hub for many multinational companies that are sourcing from those areas, the high carbon and high carbon values, the high hotspots of biodiversity in Indonesia, also in Malaysia. So you can also be conveners, also the bridgers to discuss and also to influence governments, like what the European governments do, putting more restrictions on due diligence for environments and also for the human rights violations. So you could also play that convening roles, because then that's one of the most powerful influence by influencing the law of the governments. And that's really have a big multiplier effects in parallel to the voluntary efforts. So maybe that's for now, at least.
Thank you, Mr. Chandra. And that's really, really useful to think about the fact that many multinational corporations are headquartered or have a presence in Singapore. They do source from around the region. And yes, there is something that could be said about trying to influence their corporate trajectory towards low carbon sustainability. Ms. Muller, would you share with us, what do you think a prospective environment and public and sustainable policy institute, what is comparative advantage and how would it complement Forum for the Future's work?
Thank you. I'll try to be concise and brief given the time. So these would be my questions. I don't have the answer per se, but these are things I would love to ask. So one is my first kind of message I wanted to get across is there's this rapid reliance on voluntary market solutions, or that the private sector is going to solve this challenge. And I actually think we have evidence that we're not able to stay below 1.5 degrees with a pure kind of market-based solution. So it's something about better understanding that and nudging that narrative and illuminating, I think what does progressive policy look like to actually meet what we need in order to stay below 1.5, or now it's stay below 2.5. So nudging that narrative, kind of taking the light off of all that activity and saying, actually, it needs to be more a comprehensive approach, I think. Nudging the narrative around collective intelligence, and that's really it as we go into this kind of next decade, the value of that. And then the final thing I had is we both love futures, and we both use futures processes as a way to engage people in imagining different ways. So that would be a natural, just quite selfishly, I would say that would be a really natural intersection, because it's both, we both use futures as a way to better understand how to prepare for them. And they are a way, I often call futures, it's like a Trojan horse to ask really tough questions that you can't always ask when you're just sitting across the table, a negotiation table. But when you're standing shoulder to shoulder, looking at potential scenarios, you can enable more transformative conversations. So that would be my wish list.
Thank you. And Mr. Benjamin Tay, what's your wish list?
Yeah, I've thank you for letting me be the last speaker. I had some time to think about this question. Yeah, for me, I think that the institute being that position where you have an overview of nonprofits that are working on sustainability, I think that there can be some benefit to actually look at things like, for example, impact measurement, right? Like how do we actually measure impact across sustainability across organizations that actually work on sustainability? And I know that I'm making a very big sweeping kind of like statement on like not every organization that works on sustainability has the same kind of needs in terms of impact measurement. But I think the institute having that position where they can actually see a large number of organizations and work with a large number of organizations, that can be the opportunity to actually look at things like, for example, as a young organization, we struggle with measuring impact in a quantitative manner, right? Because we have to answer to our stakeholders, we have to answer to our funders, right? But many a times when you look at sustainability issues, right, it's very difficult to measure it via quantitative kind of indicators, right? So for example, mindset shifts, this takes like 10, 20 years or even more than that, right? So everything that we're doing kind of shifts the needle, but we want to know whether what we're doing actually, how much are we actually shifting the needle by? Are we shifting the needle by just a little bit, or are we shifting the needle by a lot, right? And these things, I think, require a little bit more of a qualitative kind of appreciation for the issue. And I think that's where the institute can come in and use that position where they have seen a number of and a plethora of organizations to be able to actually make that kind of judgment on what kind of indicators, impact indicators are actually worthwhile for an organization to actually look at. Yeah. So that's on my wish list. Yeah.
That's very interesting. The idea that an impact assessment is something that an institute can really help with, and absolutely the idea of having to assess impact quantitatively is always a big challenge, especially when you're trying to measure changing norms, right? The change of norms, trying to enhance collective intelligence. How do you measure that? But no, that's very, very helpful. Thank you so much. Those were all fabulous responses. Thank you. I'm going to move on to another question. It's a very specific one, and I'm not sure. I'll just throw it open to the floor and see if anyone could take a shot at it. It says that the question really is that in Singapore, there's a tendency, there's a perception that the human habits and norms are being changed without real assessment of how effective those strategies are. So the question is asking, in the case of disposable food containers and levying a charge on them, or the idea of levying a charge on plastic bags, have there been any research studies? Have you come across any research studies thus far to evaluate its effectiveness, so as to inform stakeholders whether the approach is actually a helpful one? So I'm just going to open the question to the floor and see if anyone has any thoughts on this.
Can I offer mine? Of course, I'm not going to respond to that question directly, but I would take the theme and put it on an Asian context.
Thank you.
Using your example, Jolene, on plastic bags. we do have a regulation at the provincial level and also city level, some cities and some provinces in Indonesia to ban a plastic bag. But as far as our communities, the likes of us, I mean, think tank and educated people, they see this as a very positive measures. But actually, when you go to the ground, because that's also your question, going on the ground, there are lots of difficulties posed by this regulation to the people on the ground. Like, for example, when you go to the market and you want to buy 1 kilogram of sugar, it's easy for us if you go to the supermarket and everything. But on a wet market, it is not easy to buy, let's say, half of kilogram of sugar without having to use a plastic bag. So they keep that plastic bag, yeah, and in order to be able to enable them to trade easily. Yeah. And the enforcers that's supposed to enforce that regulation, like the one in Uganda or Kenya, whereby it is very strictly applied. It is not happening in Indonesia because people see that the merchants on the wet markets really need that, and the consumer also need that. They could not, bring their own bags to buy half a kilo of sugar because they simply don't have the means to do so. So the regulation is there, but the implementation is really hard. So I don't see whether this is a positive or a negative, but it has very real challenges to be implemented in a country like Indonesia. Perhaps Singapore would do this better with more homogeneous social status and whatnot. Thank you. Over, Julie.
Thank you, Pak Kuni. That's a very good example. I think that's also a real challenge when law enforcement is not very sensitive to the local conditions and why we would use plastic bags is not would anyone else like to respond to this question? Ms. Muller, would you have any thoughts about this? No. Okay. Thank you very much.
I agree with that one.
Thank you. So I just wanted to perhaps also share one of the comments that Ms. Muller, that you've raised in a separate chat with the audience. The idea that when we talk about change and impact, you've mentioned also that there are some systems change scholars that have developed principles to about how you measure impact at different levels of a system. So there is a lot of work that's been done on impact studies. It's just a huge area of research, and absolutely, I think, as Professor Kishore has pointed out, this is something that the Institute would be quite keen to really delve into and could help play a role in shaping that sort of thinking. I'm going to go back to the Q&A to see if there's any other questions that I might have missed. No, actually, there is a question about criminal justice system, and I'm afraid this is probably not the forum for answering that. I'm happy to point you to a colleagues of mine who work in criminal law. Well, actually, we don't really have time for another question. I'd like to invite everyone to just basically maybe say one or two things to close the session before I sort of wrap up and thank the audience for joining us today. So perhaps we'll start just to mess things around a little bit. Mr. Chandra, would you like to start first?
Yeah, I would like to give more positivity perspective. Despite on all of the crises that we are facing right now, the climate crisis, the still ongoing pandemics, I couldn't agree more with Steve Lee that there is a clear correlation between the pandemics and the deforestation issue and how the way we treat our nature. We really need to learn from that for avoiding further mistake in the future. But despite all of this crisis, I believe we need to see some positivities that happening a lot in our world right now. We see more and more commitments from companies. And then there are more than 1,000 companies right now, multinational companies that pledging their net zero carbon emissions roadmaps, and more governments pledging their policies for focusing more to support climate mitigation, also improving the climate adaptations. We need to support them. We need to support the industry. We need to support the governments. We need to support our peoples on the ground to improve their capacity, adaptive capacities. And we need to take these moments, these positive moments, seeing the pledge, and see how we can support them to really translate that wordings, the papers, and also the promise into realities. And this is where NGOs could come in as conveners, as the bridgers, and also this is where policy institutes, research institutes like you can also play pivotal roles in making it realities. So that's the most important. Let's make it realities. All of the promise, all of the jargon, all of the pledge. I think that's a positive side that we need to take as a lesson.
Thank you, Mr. Chandra. Thank you. Well noted. Ms.
Follow that up.
Sorry?
Can I follow that up?
Sure, of course, Pak Kuni, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation during COP, the current COP in Glasgow, is actually quite big on science-based target initiative, SBTI, as a way to translate that pledge into a concrete action. And I think as an institution at this, at the level of NUS for sure having that kind of stature there. So you need to, contribute on the SBTI development here in the Southeast Asia region, because we don't have that yet here in this region. WRI have done this globally, but companies that work with WRI on SBTI is mostly big companies on the Western Hemisphere, but not here in Asia. I think only Japan works on SBTI with us. Yeah, so this would be something that the institution can offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Kuni. Ms. Miller?
I think it's pretty simple. Maybe it might just be more, please. In terms of these types of conversations, what Mr. Tay spoke to in terms of this idea of metrics, I sort of think scratches the surface of the type of it, through these type of conversations, the type of sort of acupressure points that would really be interesting to explore. So, and then what Pak Kuni raised in terms of I do find that the global narrative gets shaped sort of by the West and corporate, and what does it mean to actually contribute from this region in terms of what it means to actually do the implementation, and that there's a real innovation opportunity in that, and particularly in the context of sustainable solutions. So mine is more, please.
Thank you. Mr. Tay?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I would like to just comment on what everyone kind of just spoke about, and maybe make a final comment on my end. I think Ms. Muller's point on having more of these conversations is very pertinent, because especially in the situation that we are in right now, right? I mean, I haven't had many physical meetings, I must say, for the last 2 years, right? And it's been quite distressing actually, because coming from a background where we used to go out to events, we used to go out to conferences, travel around the region, to literally sitting in front of my computer at home every day, has been quite I think has been quite a challenge, definitely, especially in terms of limiting creativity, right? Because I think a lot of what we do requires some form of requires some creative juices to be flowing a little bit more, right? And I think that human interaction part is kind of missing. But I think events like what you guys have organized here is actually really, really useful to get these juices flowing again, right? Pak Koni's idea of his point on science-based targets, I think that's really important. I think whenever we set out to do something, we need to have that idea that we need some kind of impact that can be empirically backed, that can be, that is science-based, so that whatever we do, right, we can back it up and say that, this is the outcome that we have, whether it's successful or not, right, doesn't matter, right? But at least we can say that, we can say for sure that it wasn't successful or it was successful if we have, if we have these science-based targets in place. And finally, I think Mr. Chandra's point on ending on a positive note, I think that's really important. I think very often we end off a lot of environmental issues with, with the problem is too big, we've talked a lot about it, but we can't really solve it. So, let's call it a day kind of thing, and I think that, that shouldn't be the way, a lot of this, there have been a lot of breakthroughs, whether it's small or big, right, over the years. I think, especially on the issue that I'm working on, right, in transboundary haze, a lot of people don't see it, but I think if we track the issue from 2015 till now, right, there's a lot that has been put into it, right? The Indonesian government has worked on it so much. They've set up agencies, they've set up working groups, there's so much, there've been MOUs that have been signed, there've been policies that have been put in place. Whether it's enough or not, that's another matter to be contested, right? But I mean, the fact is that we have been doing something. And I think I have seen a lot more regional cooperation in this area as well. Singapore organizations from Singapore have been pouring a little bit more resources into helping our counterparts in Indonesia, in issues of agricultural development, issues of forest conservation, things like that. So I think these things are kind of working behind the scenes. People don't really see it, but there is stuff that's being done, right? And I think that it all stems from everyone kind of just lending their support. So actually what we actually believe in is that, we ought to have this mentality that we have this shared or this collective responsibility to solve the problem. It doesn't matter whether you are everyday citizen or you are a minister of a government ministry, right? We all have a part to play in something. And I think that kind of positivity will, go a long way, especially to solve a crisis that we're in today, right? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tay. It only leaves me to thank all of you for joining us for this conversation. I've learned a lot, and I've also been, also like yourself, not had many physical meetings. I am alone in my office. I've been alone in my office for many months now. And as you said, the creative juices, flow when you have these conversations. So it's really been my privilege to moderate this discussion. And thank you so much for sharing your ideas, which we've all noted down and look forward to taking it further. And this is only the start of the conversation, so not goodbye. And thank you very much to the audience for joining us today. Bye.